Lest we forget, Operation Mincemeat from the Toll House in Lancaster. The idea. Operation Mincemeat was a successful British deception operation of World War II to disguise the 1943 Allied invasion of Sicily. Two members of British intelligence obtained the body of Glyndŵr Michael, a tramp who died from eating rat poison, dressed him as an officer of the Royal Marines and placed personal items on him, identifying him as the fictitious Captain Acting Major William Martin. Correspondence between two British generals that suggested that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily as merely the target of a feint, was also placed on the body. Part of the wider Operation Barclay, Mincemeat was based on the 1939 Trout Memo, written by Rear Admiral John Godfrey Pritchard, the Director of the Naval Intelligence Division, and his personal assistant, Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming. With the approval of the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the military commander in the Mediterranean, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The plan. The plan began by transporting the body to the southern coast of Spain by submarine and releasing it close to the shore, where it was picked up the following morning by a Spanish fisherman. The nominally neutral Spanish government shared copies of the documents with the Abwehr, the German military intelligence organisation, before returning the originals to the British. Forensic examination showed that they had been read, and ultra-decrypts of German messages showed that the Germans fell for the ruse, as German reinforcements were shifted to Greece and Sardinia. Sicily received no reinforcements. When Hitler was told about the Allies invading Sicily, he was furious, as he had sent an SS Panzer Division, 19,000 troops, to Greece. The full effect of Operation Mincemeat is not known, but Sicily was liberated more quickly than anticipated, and losses were lower than predicted. Background. On September 29, 1939, Rear Admiral John Godfrey, the Director of Naval Intelligence, circulated the Trout Memo, a paper that compared the deception of an enemy in wartime to fly fishing. Although the paper was published under Godfrey's name, it bore all the hallmarks of Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming, Godfrey's personal assistant. The memo contained many schemes for use against the Axis powers. Number 28 on the list was titled A Suggestion, not a very nice one, an idea to plant misleading papers on a corpse that would be found by the enemy. The deliberate planting of fake documents to be found by the enemy was not new. Known as the Haversack ruse, it had been practiced by the British in the First and Second World Wars. In August 1942, before the Battle of Alam el Halfa, a corpse was placed in a blown-up scout car in a minefield facing the German 90th Light Division. On the corpse was a map purportedly showing the location of British minefields. The Germans used the map, and their tanks were routed to areas of soft sand where they bogged down. More traps for the Germans. In September 1942, an aircraft flying from Britain to Gibraltar crashed off Cadiz. All aboard were killed, including Paymaster Lieutenant James Turner, carrying top-secret documents, and a French agent informing him that General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, Turner's documents included a letter from General Mark Clark, the American Deputy Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, to General Noel MacFarlane, British Governor and Commander-in-Chief of Gibraltar, informing him that General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, would arrive in Gibraltar on the eve of Operation Torch's target date of November 4th. Turner's body washed up on the beach near Tarifa and was recovered by the Spanish authorities. When the body was returned to the British, the letter was still on it, and technicians determined that the letter had not been opened. Other Allied intelligence sources established that the notebook carried by the French agent had been copied by the Germans, but they dismissed it as being disinformation. To British planners, it proved that some material that was obtained by the Spanish was being passed to the Germans. Inspiration for the plan. Charles Cholmondeley and Ewan Montague are pictured on April 17, 1943, transporting the body to Scotland. A month after the Turner crash, the British intelligence officer Charles Cholmondeley outlined his own variation of the Trout Memo plan. His plan was: the body is obtained from a London hospital, the lungs are filled with water and documents are placed in an inside pocket. The body is then dropped by an aircraft. On being found, the enemy's mind may assume that one of our aircraft has either been shot down or forced down, and that the body is one of their passengers. In November 1942, the 20 Committee, a small inter-service team in charge of double agents, turned down the plan as being unworkable, although there was some potential in the idea. Always planning. As there was a naval connection to the plan, John Masterman, chairman of the committee, assigned Ewan Montague, a naval representative, to work with Cholmondeley to develop the plan further. Montague was a peacetime lawyer and King's Counsel who volunteered at the outbreak of war. He ran NID 17, the sub-branch which handled counter-espionage work. As part of his duties, Montague had been briefed on the need for deception operations to aid the Allied war aims in a forthcoming invasion operation in the Mediterranean. In late 1942, with the Allied success in the North African campaign, military planners turned their attention to the next target. They considered that an invasion of France from Britain could not take place until 1944, and the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, wanted to use the Allied forces from North Africa to attack Europe's soft underbelly. There were two possible targets for the Allies to attack. First option was Sicily. Control of the island would open the Mediterranean to Allied shipping and allow the invasion of Europe through Italy. The second option was to go into Greece and the Balkans to trap the German forces between the British and American forces and the Soviets. At the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, the planners selected Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, and decided to undertake the invasion no later than July 1943. Plan comes together. Winston Churchill is reputed to have said, "Everybody but a bloody fool would know that it's Sicily," and that the build-up of resources for the invasion would be detected, although Hitler was concerned about a Balkan invasion, as the area had been the source of raw materials for the German war industry, including copper, bauxite, chrome and oil. The Allies knew of Hitler's fears, and they launched Operation Barclay, a a deception operation to play upon his concerns and to mislead the Germans into thinking the Balkans were the objective, diverting resources from Sicily. To suggest the eastern Mediterranean was the target, the Allies set up a headquarters in Cairo, Egypt, for a fictional formation. The 12th Army, consisting of 12 divisions, military manoeuvres were conducted in Syria, with numbers inflated by dummy tanks and armoured vehicles to deceive observers. Greek interpreters were recruited, and the Allies stockpiled Greek maps and currency. False communications about truth movements were generated from the 12th Army headquarters, while the Allied command post in Tunis, which was to be the headquarters of the invasion of Sicily, reduced radio traffic by using landlines whenever possible. Selecting a body was important. Montague and Chumley were assisted by an MI6 representative, Major Frank Foley, as they examined the practicalities of the plan. Montague approached the pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Pitcher, to determine what kind of body they needed and what factors they would need to take into account to fool the Spanish pathologist. Spilsbury told him that those who died in an air crash often did so from shock and not from drowning. The lungs would not necessarily be filled with water. He added that Spaniards, as Roman Catholics, were averse to post-mortems and did not hold them unless the cause of death was of great importance. Spilsbury advised that a person could have suffered one of many different causes of death, which could be misconstrued in an autopsy. 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Montague discussed with Bentley Purchase, coroner for the Northern District of London, the possibility of obtaining a corpse. He was told there would be practical and legal difficulties. Purchase also said, "I should think bodies are the only commodities not in short supply at the moment, but even with bodies all over the place, each one has to be accounted for." On January 28, 1943, Purchase contacted Montague. He had located a suitable body, that of Glyndwr Michael, a tramp who died from eating rat poison. When Montague said the corpse does not look like a fit field officer, Purchase replied, "He does not have to look like an officer, only a staff officer." Purchase agreed to keep the body in the mortuary refrigerator at a temperature of 4 degrees centigrade, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Any colder and the flesh would freeze, which would be obvious after the body defrosted. He warned Montague and Chumley that the body had to be used within 3 months, after which it would have decomposed past the point of usefulness. Montague refused to identify the individual and only described him as a bit of a ne'er-do-well, and that the only worthwhile thing that he ever did, he did it after his death. Montague selected the codename Mincemeat from a list of centrally held available possibilities. Identity confirmed. On February 4, 1943, Montague and Chumley filed their plan for the operation with the 20 committee. The mincemeat plan was to place documents on the corpse and then float it off the coast of Spain, whose nominally neutral government was known to cooperate with the Abwehr. The plan was passed by the committee, who passed it up the chain of command to the senior Allied strategist. Montague and Chumley were ordered to continue and began to create a legend, a fictitious background character for the body. The name and rank chosen was Captain Acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, assigned to Combined Operation Headquarters. The name Martin was selected because there were several men with that name and rank in the Royal Marines. As a Royal Marine, Major Martin came under Admiralty authority, easy to ensure that all inquiries and messages about his death would be routed to the Naval Intelligence Division. Additionally, Royal Marines would wear battle dress, which was easily obtainable and came in standard sizes. The rank of Acting Major made him senior enough to be entrusted with sensitive documents, but not so prominent that anyone would expect to know him. Instant character and love life. To reinforce the impression of Martin being a real person, he was provided with details carried on his person, known in espionage circles as pocket litter. These included a photo of an invented fiancée named Pam. The image was of an MI5 clerk, Jean Leslie. 2 love letters from Pam were included in the pocket litter, as was a receipt for a diamond engagement ring costing £53.10 and 6 from a Bond Street jewellery shop. Additional personal correspondence was included, a letter from the fictitious father of Pam, who was pompous and pedantic, as only an Edwardian father could be, a note from the family solicitor, and a message from Lloyd's Bank demanding payment of an overdraft of £79.19 and 2. MI5 scientists conducted tests on different inks to see which would last longest in the water. Other items of pocket litter included a book of stamps, a silver cross, a St. Christopher medallion, cigarettes, matches, a pencil, and a receipt from Gives for a new shirt. In total, an itinerary of his activity in London from April 18th to 24th. Small details matter. Montague and Chumley conducted a search for people who resembled the corpse. Finding Captain Ronnie Reed of MI5 picture, he agreed to be photographed for the identity card, wearing a Royal Marine uniform. As the 3 cards and passes needed to look not too new for a long-serving officer, Montague spent a few weeks rubbing all 3 cards on his trousers to provide a used sheen to them. To provide a used look to the uniform, it was worn by Chumley, who was about the same build. The only non-issue part to the uniform was the underwear, which was in short supply in war-ration Britain, so a pair of good quality woolen underwear owned by the late Herbert Fisher, the warden of New College, Oxford, was used. Deception documents. Montague outlined 3 criteria for the documents that contained details of the falsified plans to land in the Balkans. He said the target should be casually but clearly identified, that it should name Sicily as cover. The main document was a letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, pictured top, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff to General Sir Harold Alexander, pictured bottom, Commander of the Anglo-American 18th Army Group in Algeria and Tunisia under General Eisenhower. It was suggested that Nye should draw up the letter himself to cover the required points. The letter covered several sensitive subjects, such as the unwanted award of Purple Heart medals by US forces to British servicemen, serving them with them, and the appointment of a new commander of the Brigade of Guards. Montague sufficient. Final touches. There was also a letter of introduction for Martin from his assumed commanding officer, Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, Pitcher, Chief of Combined Operations, to Admiral of the Fleet Sir Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean Fleet and Allied Naval Commander in the Mediterranean. Martin was referred to in the letter as an amphibious warfare expert on loan until the assault is over. A single black eyelash was placed in the letter to check if the Germans or Spanish had opened it. Montagu thought that there would be a possible Roman Catholic prejudice against tampering with corpses, which could miss the documents in the corpses' pockets, so they added them to the official briefcase that would not be overlooked. To justify carrying documents in a briefcase, Major Martin was given 2 proof copies of the official pamphlet on combined operations written by the author Hilary Saunders, who was then on Mountbatten's staff, and a letter from Mountbatten to Eisenhower asking him to write a foreword for the pamphlet's US edition. Destination Huelva. The planning team first thought of having the handle clutched in the corpse's hand, held in place by rigor mortis, but the rigor would probably wear off and the briefcase would drift away. They therefore equipped Martin with a leather-covered chain, such as was used by bank and jewellery couriers to secure their cases against snatching by thieves. The chain unobtrusively runs down the sleeve to the case. To Montagu, it seemed unlikely that the Major would keep the bag secured to his wrist during the long flight from Britain, so the chain was looped round the belt of his trench coat. Montagu and Chumley considered the location of the corpse's delivery. They considered the French and Portuguese coasts, but rejected those in favour of Huelva on the coast of southern Spain. After advice was taken from the hydrographer of the Navy regarding the tides and currents best suited to ensure the body landed where it was wanted. Why Huelva? The choice of Huelva was made because there was a very active German agent who had excellent contacts with the Spaniards, both officials and others. The agent, Adolf Klaus, a member of the Abwehr, was the son of a German consul and operated under cover of an agricultural technician. Huelva was also chosen because the British vice consul in the city, Francis Hazelden, was a reliable and helpful man who could be relied upon. The body was supposed to be the victim of an aeroplane crash, and it was decided that to try to simulate the accident at sea using flares and other devices could be too risky and open to discovery. Seaplanes and surface ships were dismissed as being problematic. A submarine was chosen as the method of delivering the corpse to the region. To transport the body by submarine, it needed to be contained within the body of the boat. The canister needed to remain airtight and keep the corpse as fresh as possible through its journey. Final confirmation by Ike. Spilsbury provided the medical requirements, and Chumley contacted Charles Fraser Smith of the Ministry of Supply to produce the container, which was labelled "Handle with Care, Optical Instruments." On April 13, 1943, a committee of the Chiefs of Staff met and agreed that they thought the plan should proceed. The committee informed Colonel John Bevan, head of London Controlling Section, which controlled the planning of deception operations that he needed to obtain final approval from Winston Churchill. 2 days later, Bevan met the Prime Minister, who was in bed, wearing a dressing gown and smoking a cigar, in his rooms at the Cabinet War Offices, and explained the plan, warning Churchill that aspects could go wrong, including that the Spaniards might pass the corpse back to the British. With the papers unread, Churchill replied, "In that case, we shall get the body back and give it another swing." Winston gave his approval to the operation, but delegated the final confirmation to Eisenhower, the overall military commander in the Mediterranean, whose plan to invade Sicily would be effective. Bevan sent an encrypted telegram to Eisenhower's headquarters in Algeria, requesting final confirmation, which was received on April 17th. Frozen feet. The submarine selected for the operation was HMS Seraph, pictured with its officers. In the early hours of April 17, 1943, the corpse of Michael was dressed as Martin, although there was one last-minute hitch: the feet had frozen. Purchase, Montague and Chumley could not put the boots on, so an electric heater was used and the feet defrosted. The boots were put on and the pocket litter placed on the body, with the briefcase attached. The body was placed in the canister, which was filled with 21 pounds of dry ice and sealed up. The voyage. When the dry ice sublimated, it filled the canister with carbon dioxide and drove out any oxygen, thus preserving the body without refrigeration. The corpse of Dynamo Michael, dressed as Martin, just prior to being placed in the canister. The canister was placed in the 1937 Fordson van of an MI5 driver, St. John Jock Oswald, who had been a racing champion before the war. Montague and Chumley travelled in the back of the van, which drove through the night to Greenock, West Scotland, where the canister was taken on board HMS Seraph, which was preparing for a deployment to the Mediterranean. HMS Seraph's commander, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, and his crew had previous special operations experience. Jewell told his men that the canister contained a top-secret meteorological device to be deployed near Spain. On April 19th, Seraph set sail and arrived just off the coast of Huelva on April 29th, having been bombed twice en route. Mincemeat completed. After spending the day reconnoitring the coastline, at 4:15 a.m. on April 30th, HMS Seraph surfaced. Jewell had the canister brought up on deck, then sent all his crew below, except the officers. They opened the container and lowered the body into the water. Jewell read Psalm 39 and ordered the engines to full astern. The wash from the screws pushed the corpse towards the shore. The canister was reloaded and the submarine travelled 12 miles out, where it surfaced and the empty container was pushed into the water. As it floated, it was riddled with machine gun fire so that it would sink. Because of the air trapped in the insulation, this effort failed and the canister was destroyed with plastic explosives. Lieutenant Bill Jewell afterwards sent a message to the Admiralty to say, "Mincemeat completed," and the submarine continued on to Gibraltar. The body of Major Martin was found at around 9:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943 by a local fisherman. It was taken to back to the Admiralty that the body and the briefcase had been found. A series of prescripted diplomatic cables were sent between Hazeldine and his superiors, continuing for several days. Spanish handling of the corpse. The British knew that these were being intercepted, and although they were encrypted, the Germans had broken the code. The messages played out the story that it was imperative that Hazeldine retrieve the briefcase because it was important. At midday on May 1st, an autopsy was undertaken on Michael's body. Hazeldine was present in order to minimise the possibilities that the two Spanish doctors would discover that the body was a 3-month-old corpse, as if, in the heat of the day and smell of the corpse, the doctors should bring the post-mortem to a close and have lunch. They agreed and signed a death certificate for Major William Martin for asphyxiation through immersion in the sea. The body was released by the Spanish, and as Major Martin was buried in the San Marcos section of Nuestra Senora Cemetery in Huelva with full military honours on May 2nd. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, who intervened to obtain the mincemeat documents, although the Spanish Navy retained the briefcase and, despite pressure from Adolf Klaus and some of the Abwehr agents, neither it nor its contents were handed over to the Germans. On May 5th, the briefcase was passed to the naval headquarters at San Fernando near Cadiz to be forwarded to Madrid. Rubbing salt into an open wound. While at San Fernando, the contents were photographed by German sympathisers, but the letters were not opened. Once the briefcase arrived in Madrid, its contents became the focus of attention of Carl Eric Kuthenhal, a senior Abwehr agent in Spain, pictured right with Admiral Canaris far right. On the photograph of Carl Eric Kuthenhal, we see the name of Ben McIntyre, the New York Times best-selling author of Agent Zigzag. A comment was as follows: "Our dead man and a bizarre plan felled the Nazis and assured Allied victory, and it was stamped Operation Mincemeat, maybe to rub salt into an open wound." The noose is tightening. Kuhlenthal asked Admiral Canaris to personally intervene and persuade the Spanish to surrender the documents. Acceding to the request, the Spanish removed the still damp paper by tightly winding it around a probe into a cylindrical shape. The letters were dried and photographed, then soaked in salt water for 24 hours before being put back into their envelopes without the eyelash star being planted there. The information was passed to the Germans on May 8th. This was deemed so important by Abwehr agents that Kuhlenthal personally took the documents to Germany. On May 11th, the briefcase, complete with documents, was returned to Hazelden by the Spanish authorities. He forwarded it to London in the diplomatic bag. On receipt, the documents were forensically examined and the absence of the eyelash noted. Further tests showed the fibres in the pages had been damaged by folding more than once, which confirmed that the letters had been extracted and read. An additional test was made as the papers, still wet, were dried out to allay any potential German fears that their activities had been discovered. Another prearranged, encrypted but breakable cable was sent to Hazelden, stating that the envelopes had been examined and that they had not been opened. Hazelden linked the news to Spaniards known to be sympathetic to the Germans. Hook, line and sinker. Final proof that the Germans had been passed information from the letters came on May 14th, when a German communication was decrypted by the government code and cipher script, GC and CS at the Bletchley Park. The message, which had been sent 2 days previously, warned that the invasion was to be in the Balkans, with a feint to the Dodecanese. A message was sent by Brigadier Leslie Hollis, the Secretary to the Chiefs of Staff Committee, to Winston Churchill. Then in the United States it read, "Mincemeat, swallowed hook, line and sinker by the right people, and from the best information they look like acting on it." Montague continued the deception to reinforce the existence of Major Martin, and included his details in the published list of British casualties, which appeared in the Times on June the 4th. By coincidence, also published that day were the names of 2 other officers who had died when their plane was lost at sea. And opposite the casualty listings was a report that the film star Leslie Howard had been shot down by the Luftwaffe and died in the Bay of Biscay. Both stories gave credence to the Major Martin story. German reaction. On May 14, 1943, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz pictured met Hitler discuss Dönitz's recent visit to Italy, his meeting with the Italian leader Benito Mussolini and the progress of the war. The Admiral, referring to the mincemeat documents as the Anglo-Saxon order, recorded, "The Führer does not agree with Mussolini that the most likely invasion point is Sicily. Furthermore, he believes that the discovered Anglo-Saxon order confirms the assumption that the planned attacks will be directed mainly against Sardinia, Greece and Corsica, and we must defend these at all costs, and that German troops would be best placed to do the job." Hitler ordered that the experienced 1st Panzer Division be transferred from France to Salonika, Greece. This order was intercepted by GC and CS on May 21st. Operation Husky. By the end of June, German troop strength on Sardinia had been doubled to 10,000, with fighter aircraft also being based there as support. German torpedo boats were moved from Sicily to the Greek islands in preparation. 7 German divisions transferred to Greece, raising the number present to 8, and 10 were posted to the Balkans, raising the number present to 18. On July 9th, the Allies invaded Sicily in Operation Husky. German signals intercepted by GCCS at Bletchley Park showed that even 4 hours after the invasion of Sicily began, 21 aircraft left Sicily to reinforce Sardinia. For a considerable time after the initial invasion, Hitler was still convinced that an attack on the Balkans was imminent, and in late July he sent General Erwin Rommel to Salonika to prepare the defence of the region. But by the time the German High Command realised the mistake, it was too late to make a difference. King Victor Emmanuel III takes over. On July 25th, 1943, as the began secret negotiations with the Allies. Sicily fell on August 17 after a force of 65,000 Germans held off 400,000 American and British troops long enough to allow many of the Germans to evacuate to the Italian mainland. Historians. John Latimer, military historian, says that the relative ease with which the Allied soldiers captured Sicily was not entirely because of mincemeat or the wider deception of Operation Barclay. He identifies other factors, including Hitler's distrust of the Italians and his unwillingness to risk German troops alongside Italian troops who may have been on the point of a general surrender. Military historian Michael Howard, while describing mincemeat as perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war, considered mincemeat and Barclay to have less impact on the course of the Sicily campaign than Hitler's congenital obsession with the Balkans. It might be that the exact impact of mincemeat is impossible to calculate, although the British had expected 10,000 killed or wounded in the first week of fighting. Only a seventh, 1,430 of that number, became casualties. The Navy expected 300 ships would be sunk, but they lost 12. The predicted 90-day campaign was over in 38 days. As a result of Operation Husky, Hitler suspended the Kursk offence on July 13th. This was partly because of the Soviet army, but partly because he still assumed that the Allied landing on Sicily was a feint that preceded the invasion in the Balkans. He wanted to have troops available for fast deployment, but once Hitler gave the initiative to the Soviets, he never regained it. Legacy. Montagu was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire in 1944 for his part in Operation Mincemeat. For masterminding the plan, Chumley was appointed a member of the Order in 1948. The photograph is the resting place of Glendower Michael in Huelva, Spain, and Duff Cooper, the former cabinet minister who had been briefed on the operation in March 1943, published the spy novel Operation Heartbreak in 1950, which contained the plot: a corpse with papers naming him as William Marrington being floated off the coast of Spain with false documents to deceive the Germans. The British Security Services decided that the best response was to publish the story of mincemeat. Over the course of a weekend, Montagu wrote The Man Who Never Was in 1953, which sold 2 million copies and formed the basis for a 1956 film. What came out of Operation Mincemeat? The security services did not give Montagu complete freedom to reveal operation details, and he was careful not to mention the role played by signals intelligence to confirm that the operation had been successful. He was also careful to obscure the idea of an organised programme of strategic deception, with mincemeat being presented as a wild, one-off caper. In 1977, Montagu published Beyond Top Secret U, his wartime autobiography, which gave further details of mincemeat and on other operations. Over 30 years later, in 2010, the journalist Ben McIntyre published This wonderful deception might go on forever. In 2014, a BBC television miniseries, Fleming, the Man Who Would Be Bond, dramatised some aspects of Operation Mincemeat and Fleming's connection to the operation. In 2022, the film Operation Mincemeat was released, with Colin Firth as Montague and Matthew McFadden as Chumley. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission took responsibility for Major Martin's grave in Huelva in 1977, and in 1997 the Commission added the proscript Dynamo Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. In November 2021, the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation, working with the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women and the London Borough of Hackney, placed a memorial at the Hackney Mortuary. The words on the tablet: Operation Mincemeat. The Hackney Mortuary played an important role in a British military operation during the Second World War, 1939 to 45, which helped save the lives of thousands of soldiers. In April 1943, Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, CBD KC, a British Jew, and Flight Lieutenant Charles C. Chumley, MBE, a British aristocrat, planned Operation Mincemeat to misdirect German forces' attention away from the Allied invasion of Sicily. They brought the donated body of a man to Hackney Mortuary, where it stayed on ice for 3 months. Chumley and Montague transformed the corpse into a fictitious officer, Major William Martin. The body was taken to Scotland and went to a point of southern Spain, where it was placed in the water, carrying false letters from senior Allied officers, suggesting the Allies would invade Greece, not Sicily. When the body was found, the letters were shared with Nazi intelligence, misdirecting German forces, saving thousands of British and American soldiers' lives during the invasion of Sicily. Set a watch before my mouth, Lord, and over the door of my lips. John Keegan's book, The First World War, said this: the First World War was a tragic and unnecessary conflict because the train of events that led to its outbreak might have been broken at any point during the 5 weeks of crisis that preceded the first clash of arms. Had prudence or common sense and goodwill found a voice, tragic because of the consequences of the first clash ended the lives of 10 million human beings, tortured the emotional lives of millions more, destroyed the benevolent and optimistic culture of the European continent, and left, when the guns at last fell silent 4 years later, a legacy of political rancor and racial hatred so intense that no explanation of the causes of the Second World War can stand without reference to those roots. The Second World War, 5 times more destructive of human life and incalculably more costly in material terms, was the direct outcome of the first. The Great War created the modern world, a conflict of unparalleled ferocity, which extended far beyond its European epicentre. It destroyed the century of relative peace and prosperity, which we associate with the Victorian era, and unleashed the demons of the 20th century: pestilence, military destruction, and mass death. On September 18, 1922, Adolf Hitler, the demobilised front fighter, threw challenge to defeated Germany that he would realise 17 years later. It cannot be that 2 million Germans should have fallen in vain. No, we do not pardon, we demand vengeance. This talk was in remembrance of my beautiful, amazing wife, Margaret, who I loved for 65 years, and who always